Greetings and salutations everyone, my name is Andrew Kirchhoff and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my NFL playoff predictions for the 2020-2021 season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be covering all things related to the playoffs. Of course, I want to first and foremost start off by talking about the NFL Wildcard weekend. This upcoming weekend we have 6 games, 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday. Of course, typically we do not have 6 wildcard games as there are 2 teams with byes, but because of the NFL changing rules, we have an extra team in the playoffs. The only teams that will not be participating this week are the Kansas City Chiefs on the AFC and the Green Bay Packers on the NFC. All the other teams will be participating and we'll be talking about every single one of them, my thought process behind how they're going to potentially perform this week, and my thought process behind how the spreads are going to work and what I'm putting my money down on. I'll give you guys my, kind of overall evaluation of that. We'll get through the wild card weekend, then we'll continue throughout the rest of the episode talking about my rest of season predictions as to who's going to win the Super Bowl, who's going to win the following rounds, and who I think has the best chance of pulling the biggest upset if it pertains to the NFL playoffs. So before we begin, I want to thank you guys again for the incredible support this season. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. If you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button. We typically talk about all things related to fantasy football, but as the fantasy football season is over, we are moving on and talking about any NFL related things, specifically the NFL playoffs, because there are still players that could have breakout performances here that could, kind of buy themselves some draft stock going into the 2021 season. But regardless, we're talking about all things related to the playoffs, and let's get into that as we begin. You won't see me potentially for the rest of the episode till the end. So again, thank you very much. There will be timestamps down below if you're looking for me to talk about a specific matchup. Otherwise, I'm going to take us to the big board, the bracket specifically, the NFL playoff bracket for this upcoming season. As you can see, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Green Bay Packers are on the very top, as those are the 2 teams that are the number 1 seeds of their respective divisions. Now, of course, we have the other matchups that are definitely going to be some exciting ones this upcoming weekend, but I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost talk about the matchup on our bottom left, the Pittsburgh Steelers playing against the Cleveland Browns. This is not only a division matchup and divisional rivalry, this is the number 3 seed playing against the number 6 seed on the AFC side of the bracket. Now, as it currently stands, my complete thought process is Steelers all the way, and I'm going to go ahead and probably lock that in, mainly because let's look at just what happened this past week. In Week 17, the Cleveland Browns had to win out in order to make the NFL playoffs. Who did they defeat? They defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers, who did not have Ben Roethlisberger. In fact, they had Mason Rudolph as their starting quarterback. They didn't have Mike Pouncey, their starting center. They did not use any of their stud defensive players like a TJ Watt or a Hayward. They were pretty much playing conservatively. They knew they were going to make the playoffs. They knew they weren't going to lock in a second seed because the Buffalo Bills were going to be starting their players, so they took it easy. Yet they only lost by 2 points. One extra accurate throw by Mason Rudolph to Chase Claypool and converting of that 2-point conversion, we maybe send this game to overtime, and maybe perhaps the Pittsburgh Steelers win this game. But only losing by 2 with backups, specifically backup quarterback, is a huge deal for me specifically. And I think just looking back at what Week 6 had for both of these teams, I mean, the last time these 2 teams played in Pittsburgh, it was a 38-7 blowout in which Pittsburgh just completely cleaned out anything that the Cleveland Browns tried to produce. Now, of course, there is a potential that the Cleveland Browns, as a team that we've seen in the last couple weeks, put up some good performances against good AFC teams. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens, they put up, 42 points against them. They put up 41 on the Tennessee Titans, in which they defeated the Tennessee Titans in that game. But again, my concern is, what are the Cleveland Browns this week? And to be honest, with all of the COVID situation that they have been dealing with this season, it comes to a head this week because their head coach, Kevin Stefanski, is currently probably not going to be involved in this game. That is unfortunately the fact of the matter, but he's tested positive and he's not going to be able to be associated with the team. Not only that, but Joel Bitonio, one of their starting offensive linemen, he is out. He's been put on the COVID IR. We also have Nick Harris, the backup to Joel Bitonio, who has been a backup, and been, playing a couple games here and there this season based on the injuries to this offensive line. He is not going to be playing this upcoming week. And earlier today, Jack Conklin, their all-pro right tackle for the Cleveland Browns, he's dealing with an illness, undisclosed as of this current moment in time. They also have Olivier Vernon, the opposite defensive end to Myles Garrett, who will be on the injured reserve and not be playing this game. Sure, all of these things stack up against the Cleveland Browns, and I really do think these are the determining factors on whether or not this team can win, because this team needs to be able to run the ball, and they need to be able to kill clock in order to make sure that they can win this game. And yes, Baker Mayfield is going to be the X factor, because like we saw last week, Nick Chubb is going to get his. He's going to be able to produce. This defense will be able to hold at times, but when it all comes push to shove, it's going to be a matter of whether Baker Mayfield in the passing game can be able to score more than Ben Roethlisberger. And when we see Mason Rudolph, connecting with Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool last week for 262 total receiving yards from those three receivers, with a guy like Mason Rudolph, it leads to me believing that the Pittsburgh Steelers get this W, and it should be an easy one. I'm locking that in. Currently, the spread is, I've seen it in different places, different numbers. Currently, what I'm getting is -6. I've seen some places have -5.5. If that's the case, lock it in. Thank you, please, and thank you. I mean, honestly, at that point, -5.5, I think this is an automatic. I think even at -6, which I'm pretty much, that is what I'm taking. I like the Pittsburgh Steelers to win and to potentially cover this week. That is my lock in there, and I'm pretty confident about that going into this upcoming week. All right, so now that we've covered the Pittsburgh Steelers, I wanted to go ahead and let's continue with the AFC. Let's begin with the Buffalo Bills taking on the Indianapolis Colts. Now, of course, the Indianapolis Colts are a good team. They had to win to get in. They beat the Jacksonville Jaguars 28-14 this past week. But the question is, can this Buffalo Bills team, who will be playing at home, who is the number 2 seed, who just put up 56 points on the Miami Dolphins in a game that they didn't even have to try, but regardless of whether they had to try, they, with relative ease, were able to put up a significant amount of points on that defense that has been one of the better defense in the National Football League underneath the tutelage of Brian Flores. They have been fantastic. They've caused turnovers, but they could not stop a soul. The Buffalo Bills are on fire. These are one of the teams that is just unbelievable as of right now. In terms of covering, they have I think 6 consecutive covers in the last 6 weeks. Of course, they're the second highest scoring offense in the National Football League for points per game. They will be getting Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley back this week. Of course, they do have John Brown, who scored a touchdown last week, Gabriel Davis, who scored a touchdown last week. There is so much potential in this passing game. Going against this Indianapolis Colts is going to be tough for the Colts playing in Buffalo to be able to keep up. Again, when we talk about how hot the Buffalo Bills have been as of late, their margin of victory in the last 6 games is 119 points. The Buffalo Bills offense has averaged 29 points per game in the last 3 games alone. Again, the Buffalo Bills, they're absolutely on fire. And as long as they're healthy and they're ready to go, and Josh Allen has been playing as well as he has and he continues to do so, I 100% expect this team to be able to win this game. Now, of course, on the other side of the ball, you have a great defense. You have all pro players on that defense. You have DeForest Buckner locking down the running game. You have Darius Leonard, of course, one of the better linebackers in the National Football League. The question is, can that defense stop Josh Allen? And even if they're able to do so, what can Phillip Rivers and this Colts offense lean upon in order to win this game? In terms of all the teams that are left in the NFL playoffs, you guys know I talk about matchups all the time for fantasy. The Buffalo Bills are the worst run-stopping defense out of this group. And of course, they take on Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor has been unbelievable in the last 6 games. They have allowed him to unleash himself with 741 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. And of course, you have yourself 14 receptions, 96 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown in just the last 6 games. Again, Jonathan Taylor, 850 yards in the last 6 games with 8 touchdowns. He has been unbelievable. He's going to be able to, of course, impose his will. And that's going to be their biggest determining factor whether they win. Because Rivers, in my opinion, is a game manager. And especially in matchups against the Buffalo Bills defense, which is one of the better ones in the National Football League, it's going to be a matter of whether or not this team can take an early lead and be able to kill clock. And if they're not able to do so, then Josh Allen's going to be able to roll through this team. And I think that's how this is going to potentially pan out. I'll take the Buffalo Bills. I'll take the -6. That is my prediction. They win and they advance this next round this upcoming week. Now, I wanted to go ahead before we talk about the Tennessee Titans and the Baltimore Ravens, because I think that is one of the closer matchups as of this upcoming week. I want to move on to the NFC side. I want to talk about the bottom right matchup. Of course, we have the Seattle Seahawks versus my Los Angeles Rams. Again, many of you guys know I'm a huge Los Angeles sports fan because that's where I live. So the matter as of, as it currently stands is, of course, this is a team that is playing one another for the 3rd time this season. They've split it, of course, 1-1 this season. In Week 10, the Los Angeles Rams won 23-16. In Week 16, the Los Angeles Rams lost 20-19 as the Seattle Seahawks pretty much established a pretty dominant win. Now, these are the questions that pretty much revolve around this entire scenario. Is Goff healthy? Is his thumb going to be able to hold up? Yes, they get Cooper Kupp back. You get Michael Brockers back. You get Andrew Whitworth, your all-pro left tackle and potential legend, back. But the question is that enough with Goff's current thumb situation to be able to produce? I don't see that being the case. The Rams, as of the last 2 weeks, have not scored a touchdown. I know whether or not it is Goff. I mean, if it's Goff, I think they have a better chance. If you're going to go with Wolford, I mean, you have a problem. You have a definite problem. You are not winning this game, and it's not going to be close. But when I think about what the Rams have done in the last couple of weeks, struggling against the Jets, struggling against the Seattle Seahawks the last time they played, I really look at it and I think to myself, there's no real chance that the Rams have offensively to be able to score. And when I think about what the Seattle Seahawks have done, I've talked about this ad nauseum throughout the entire season. The Seahawks have become a significantly better defense. From weeks 1 through 9, they were giving up 30 points per game in the National Football League. And in just the last 8 games, from weeks 10 through 17, they've only allowed 16 points per game to opposing offenses. They have been a significantly better offense. They have not allowed a single receiving touchdown by a wide receiver from the Rams this season in the 2 matchups they have played. Another stat, I mean, Russell Wilson is a guy that you want to play at home. And when he is at home, the Seattle Seahawks have won 10 straight home games in the playoffs. This is what, Russell Wilson is built for. I know his offense, and he has not been playing up to what he had been producing earlier this season, but I do expect this to be a lower scoring game. Probably could end up betting the under here and succeeding here, but I'll take the Seahawks and I'll take the -3. I'm playing against my Los Angeles Rams, which is tough to say, but to be honest, if the Rams win, so be it. That's great. Otherwise, my bet will go through, and I'll take the Seattle Seahawks -3. All right, we move on, and I want to continue with the AFC side. Let's stay here with the Saints versus the Chicago Bears. Now, the Chicago Bears are a surprise playoff make. They got in as an 8-8 team. Again, they started 5-1, and then they went on a terrible losing streak until they switched quarterbacks from Nick Foles to Mitch Trubisky based on injury. Now, again, Mitchell Trubisky has won 3 out of the last 4 games in a pretty convincing fashion, but the question is, has the lack of competition as of late really kind of shown that the Chicago Bears maybe aren't as good as they think or people think? I think that may be the case. When they've played elite teams, this team has not produced, though they did take the New Orleans Saints to overtime earlier this season, in which the New Orleans Saints won 26-23. As of the last couple weeks, when this Chicago Bears team has played against the Green Bay Packers, they have been beat up by double-digit points. They have had points dropped on their head. And if you can go ahead and you can stop the Bears from successfully running the ball and giving the ball to Mitchell Trubisky and forcing him to have to beat you, I think that the New Orleans Saints are in a pretty good position. So, in my opinion, based on the fact that you're getting Alvin Kamara back, you get back Michael Thomas, you have a fully healthy, functioning offense, you have one of the better run-stopping defenses, which, of course, that is where the Bears have succeeded the most as of late, with David Montgomery really pulling his share. I think he surpassed 1,200 rushing yards and has had 10 rushing touchdowns this season. That's pretty much their bread and butter, their offense as of late. That's where they found the most success. So if you can stop that, especially at home with Drew Brees, in a dome stadium, with the amount of weapons they have, whether it's Taysom Hill in the running game, Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, you have Jared Cook, Michael Thomas returning from the injured reserve. I think this offense is ready to go. I think they're built for the playoffs, specifically because, of course, they are at home. If this is an away game, we have a different conversation. But considering they're at home, I'll take the New Orleans Saints. Now, the question is, do I take them with the current spread? They're -9.5 favorites. So they've got to win by 10 points in order to be able to lock this down. I think between the Chicago Bears and the Washington football team, one of these two teams is going to cover. I'm not confident about either of these, but for right now, I'm just going to say the New Orleans Saints cover. They win by 10 plus points. They definitely, they take the W. Their margin of victory as of late against relatively good teams, in my opinion, has been pretty significant. They blew out the Carolina Panthers and they blew out the Minnesota Vikings. I think they'll continue that streak and they'll do a pretty good number on the Chicago Bears this upcoming week. Okay, we move on. Let's stay with the last team here on the NFC before we talk about, of course, the Tennessee Titans versus the Baltimore Ravens, because I think that's the toughest match of the week. We're going to talk about the Washington football team playing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Of course, here's the thing. The Washington football team, they are better defense. I mean, in terms of the secondary, I think they're second best against wide receivers this season and quarterbacks. They've been a pretty, solid defense, but they haven't really been playing against great competition. When you play against, Nate Sudfeld or Daniel Jones or Andy Dalton all season long, those aren't the greatest matchups to really hang your hat on when, you have the GOAT coming into town. Sure, of course, Tom Brady has played in every single stadium. He can produce against anybody, but the biggest thing is, can this secondary and this defensive line specifically rush the passer to the extent to where they can make Brady uncomfortable, force a lack of scoring early in this game. Again, in terms of what we saw earlier this season in comparison as of late, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers typically start slow. And if that's going to be the case, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to potentially start slow, we could see the second half Washington football team, who again are the best defense as of late in terms of stopping teams in the fourth quarter. They have allowed the fewest points in the fourth quarter in just the last, 8 games in the National Football League. It seems to me that they're going to have to score early if Tom Brady is going to want to have to, pretty much clinch up a victory here. It's going to be a tough task. That's for certain. Of course, he's struggled against teams like this that have, high defensive firepower in comparison to their offense. If you do have Mike Evans a full go, of course, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Gronk, I think that the advantage lies in the favor of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to win. But like I was mentioning earlier, I do think that one of the two teams between the Washington football team and the Chicago Bears are going to cover. I think I'm going to take plus 7.5 with Washington. I think this is going to be a closer game than a lot of people think. I think it's going to be tough for this offense to score because the Washington football team defense has been playing well all season long. And I think they keep it close. Of course, the Washington football team offense, with having McLaurin and Antonio Gibson potentially at a full capacity this upcoming week, does give them a little bit more of a higher ceiling of potential. But again, Tampa Bay's got one of the better run-stopping defense. It is going to force Alex Smith to have to throw the ball to win the game. But I think it'll stay close, maybe a backdoor cover of sorts. But either way, I'm taking Tampa Bay. All right, so let's close this out in terms of Wild Card Weekend with the last matchup here with the Tennessee Titans playing against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, this is one that I kind of sat on for a while, and I thought to myself, man, I really can't decide who's going to win this game. As of right now, we have the Tennessee Titans as a home dog. They're being spotted, plus 3 points? My goodness. The fact that the Baltimore Ravens are an away team and they're the favorite in comparison to Tennessee. Of course, these two teams have played twice in the last 2 years. Of course, the NFL playoffs, in which the Tennessee Titans were able to defeat the Baltimore Ravens 28-12. Derrick Henry being a big factor of that with 202 yards, a passing touchdown, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Of course, the big factor there. And even earlier this season, which in Week 11, Derrick Henry, 133 yards and a touchdown, winning in overtime, 30-24. Now, this is the thing that kind of looms in my mind that gives me the thought process that potentially we could see the Baltimore Ravens take another L in the playoffs and Lamar Jackson losing his 3rd consecutive playoff game. Of course, a couple years back to the Chargers, last year to the Tennessee Titans, and potentially this year again to the Tennessee Titans. I think playoff Derrick Henry, give Derrick Henry the ball 30 times, is a game plan that a lot of teams cannot stop. And even though the Baltimore Ravens have been a good run defense this season, there have been times in which they have been completely destroyed, specifically against Derrick Henry. I think if you go back to last season in 2019 and you look at those 3 consecutive games of 30-plus rushing attempts from Derrick Henry, starting from the regular season, going into the NFL playoffs against the New England Patriots, and then followed up with a 30 rushing attempt game against the Baltimore Ravens, it's clear to see that this team succeeds heavily when you're feeding this man the ball. He was averaging 6.5 yards per carry in that 202-yard game against the Baltimore Ravens last season. I think we're going to start that streak as of last week. Just look at the game he put up against Houston, 250 rushing yards. He had himself 34 rushing attempts. I think they're going to give him the ball just as many times. He's going to touch the ball at a premium amount, and he's going to dictate the game. It's going to be a matter of whether or not Derrick Henry can dominate the running game and be able to kill clock. I know Ryan Tannehill, A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, they are up for the task. They've proven that this season. I think the fact that they're giving Tennessee points, 3 points specifically, is pretty surprising. Again, as a home dog this season, they are 1-1. The only time that they lost as a home dog was against the Pittsburgh Steelers. If Gostkowski hits that field goal, they end up winning that game and they're 2-0 home dog. So again, I'm taking the Tennessee Titans this week. I think Derrick Henry is just an unstoppable force. Though the Baltimore Ravens defense could be an immovable object, and even though Lamar Jackson, this passing attack, the fact that the Tennessee Titans have been one of the worst defenses in the National Football League, the playoffs kind of bring out a different breed of player. If Lamar Jackson is going to come out and just light them up early, then sure, they have a very good chance, because if you have to force Tennessee to throw the ball, say in the second half, instead of run the ball, then you give yourself an extra opportunity. Because again, the Tennessee Titans secondary, in the last couple weeks, they've given up a 100-yard wide receiver each of the last 3 games. So again, I do think that the Tennessee Titans secondary, awful. I do think that their run-stopping defense has been terrible. I mean, with J.K. Dobbins averaging 6+ yards per carry, of course, you have Gus Edwards and Lamar Jackson with 5+ yards per carry. These are the two best run attacks in the National Football League. The Baltimore Ravens coming off of another season in which Lamar Jackson had over 1,000 rushing yards, over 3,000 rushing yards as a team. The second best rushing team in the National Football League is behind the guy that just ran for 2,000 rushing yards and 2,600 as a total team, which is the Tennessee Titans. So again, I think this is going to be a run-first event, and I think in terms of both these teams, it's going to be tough, but I'll take Derrick Henry. I'll put my money on him. All right, so now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and talk about the rest of the NFL playoffs. Now, of course, we will be, kind of giving you guys my thought process. It probably won't be to an even greater extent because we won't know who's completely healthy. But if everything stays according to the plan, I think that regardless of who plays against the Kansas City Chiefs, they do win. I think the Kansas City Chiefs are built to completely win this season out. There is nothing that they're, in terms of injuries, in terms of what they've shown on film or as on tape as of late, that have given me the inclination that this team is not ready to win as of this current moment in time. Of course, everyone is thinking that they're going to win. There could be an upset that gets pulled off, but you're going to really have to put up a lot of points on Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill in order to, prevent them from putting up a lot of points against you in the second half. Just go back to the Deshaun Watson debacle last NFL playoffs where Houston was up, 21 points and they blew that. So again, I think regardless of who plays against the Kansas City Chiefs, it's going to be tough for them. Now, the next matchup that I think is pretty vital, but an easy one in my eyes, is the Green Bay Packers beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The first time these two teams played, it was in Tampa Bay earlier this season. It was a blowout. That was the worst game I've ever seen Aaron Rodgers play. And since then, Aaron Rodgers has been unstoppable. Again, 49 passing touchdowns this season, 52 total. This is another quarterback that's having a legendary season. And even though he does not have his starting all-pro left tackle, David Bakhtiari, the pass rush will get there probably eventually. But I find it hard to believe that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be able to go to Green Bay with the weather, conditions and be able to perform just as well as they do at home. I think the advantage is certainly in the direction of the Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, Aaron Rodgers combination. I'll take Green Bay. I'll take Kansas City there as those two teams getting to the Final Four and to the, of course, AFC and NFC championships. Now, as it pertains to the teams that we have remaining, I'll go to the bottom right because I think this is an easier one myself to potentially kind of lock down. I think that Drew Brees, as of right now, playing at home against Seattle. The Seattle Seahawks, though they have been better, offensively, they're going to have a potentially tough time scoring against this team. I think DK Metcalf will be fine. I think Tyler Lockett has gotten a little bit more usage as of late. But the question is, can they keep up in terms of the offense of what the New Orleans Saints kind of puts up on a weekly basis? I don't think that'll be the case. I think the Saints make it to the NFC Championship and will be taking on the Green Bay Packers. And on the other side of the bracket, we've seen this matchup once earlier this season. The Buffalo Bills were able to handle the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Pittsburgh traveling up to Buffalo will be their biggest nightmare. And I think Buffalo advances to the AFC Championship. So now the question remains, who is going to be making the NFL Super Bowl for the 2020-2021 season? I think going and starting off with the AFC side, we've seen these two teams play earlier this season, and though it will be a different matchup and a higher scoring one at that, I do think that Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs will be making it to the Super Bowl for the second consecutive year. On the opposite side, the Packers versus the New Orleans Saints, even though this is probably the last season for Drew Brees, traveling to and playing in Green Bay is the worst possible scenario Drew Brees could have possibly even imagined. He is not good in weather conditions, specifically like we will potentially see with a snow game and or an extremely, probably a 30-degree game, maybe even lower in Green Bay. That does not bode well for Drew Brees in his career. He has not been a player that can play outside and potentially win games. So I think that is the biggest detriment to them. Sure, you can try to run the ball against Green Bay. They are one of the worst run-stopping defenses in the National Football League. But in terms of keeping up with Aaron Rodgers, it is going to be difficult. I think the Packers advance to the National Football League Super Bowl for the 2020-21 season. And the question remains, Patrick Mahomes, the gunslinger, versus the OG gunslinger and the MVP of the league, Aaron Rodgers. Who is going to win the Super Bowl this year? Though it is tough, I will go with my preseason prediction from earlier this year. And I will continue with that trend of saying the Kansas City Chiefs are running it back. They're going to lock down the Super Bowl this year, and they're going to continue their dynasty of dominating teams in the National Football League. Of course, there could be an upset, but I think both these teams are the most talented in the National Football League as it currently stands. It is going to be very difficult to beat these teams, especially when they're at home in their own conditions. The health that they have in terms of their offense, their defense has been playing better. I mean, Jaire Alexander is one of the better cornerbacks in the National Football League. Tyrann Mathieu has been locking down that secondary. It's going to be a tough task. But either way, I think the Kansas City Chiefs lock it down and win the Super Bowl this upcoming season. So, those are my predictions for the 2020-2021 NFL playoffs. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, tomorrow morning, I'll probably be live streaming from 10 a.m. to pretty much the end of the Bills game. I'm going to watch that game. Should be a fun one. I think the Indianapolis Colts could keep it close, but I think, Josh Allen should be able to come out there and put up a pretty number on that defense with his entire wide receiver core healthy and ready to go. He's got a lot of weapons at his disposal. He's been playing fantastic, and I think he's just going to continue to extend that trend going to NFL playoffs. Anyway, I'll be live streaming tomorrow. If you guys are interested to come by, do a little bit of a watch along, ask questions, talk about fantasy, anything like that, I'll be here. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, which will be, probably this time next week, I'll see you guys. Peace.